Good afternoon and welcome to the cardiovascular system. We are going to look at the great blood vessels this afternoon. My name is Francis Anthony and I work with St. Carol's School of Nursing, your anatomy lecturer. Right. The great blood vessels are blood vessels that supply major organs. We have the aorta branching off into the visceral organs. So I want you to go on with me, join me as we go through the blood vessels and circulation. We will look at the general anatomy of blood vessels. We look at blood pressure, we look at capillary exchange, we look at venous return, and if we have time, we look at circulatory shock. Now, when we talk about the blood vessels, we have three major blood vessels: the capillaries, the arteries, and then the veins. The arteries carry blood away from the heart, and then they divide to give you the arterioles, smaller arteries. The veins carry blood back to the heart, and they also divide to give you the smaller veins called venules. And in between the veins and the arteries, we have the capillaries. They are the smallest. They have the largest surface area. They are only 1 cell thick, and they are where exchange of nutrients and materials take place. Now, the blood vessels have major layers. We call them 3 major layers. The 3 major layers, we have the innermost layer, also known as tunica intima or tunica interna. They are in direct contact with the blood. They line the blood vessels and they are exposed to the blood. And the endothelium is made up of simple squamous epithelium overlying a basement membrane and a sparse layer of loose connective tissue. They are selectively permeable. The endothelium is just 1 cell thick. They secrete chemicals and stimulate the dilation and constriction of the vessel. Normally repels blood cells and platelets, and so their innermost layer is very, very smooth so that they prevent blood from clotting. The middle layer is called the tunica media. It is made up of smooth muscles, collagen, and elastic fibers. They strengthen the vessel and prevent blood pressure from rupturing them or from destroying them. They have vasomotion. They change in their diameter of the blood vessels brought about by smooth muscle. The vasomotion is that it changes in diameter of the blood vessel brought about by smooth muscle. The outermost layer is known as tunica externa, and we call that sometimes tunica adventitia. They are the outermost layer. They are made up of loose connective tissue that often merges with that of neighboring blood vessels, nerves, and other organs. They anchor the blood vessels and provide passage for small nerves and lymphatic vessels. So here they are. If you look on the board, you would see that the outermost layer called the tunica externa, the middle tunica media, and then the innermost tunica intima. And then the lumen. The lumen is where the blood passes. This side is for a vein, and that one is for an artery. That is for an artery. So the vein and the arteries, they are different. There are differences between them. But the capillary is made up of only the tunica intima. The capillary is made up of only the tunica intima. All right. When we take a look at the medium vein, they have valves, and the valves prevent backflow. The valves prevent backflow. It's only found in the veins. The arteries do not have valves running in them because they are carrying blood under pressure. By the time the blood passes through the capillaries and gets to the veins and the venous, the pressure is far, far, far reduced. That is why the veins have developed the tunica intima of the veins have developed to become the valves so that they can prevent backflow. The vein have got bigger lumen, larger lumen than the arteries. The arteries have smaller lumen because they are carrying blood under pressure, whereas the veins are carrying blood with very little pressure in them. Arteries sometimes are called resistance vessels because they have strong, resilient tissue that resists blood pressure. Because they are carrying blood under pressure, they must have walls that can withstand the pressure. Some small arteries are called arterioles, and they continue from the arteries. Sometimes there is a weak point in an artery or a heart wall, and we call that aneurysm. It forms thin-walled bulging sac that pulses with each heartbeat. And if it ruptures, if it breaks open, it will cause bleeding. And if the bleeding, if the aneurysm is in a large vessel, it will cause the lot of blood to be lost from the vessel. So, dissecting aneurysm is blood that accumulates between the tunics in the arteries and separates them. And it can cause pain by putting pressure on other structures, dissecting aneurysm, and it results in congenital weakness of the blood vessels or results in trauma or bacterial infections such as syphilis, the most common cause of atherosclerosis and hypertension. Now, arterial sense organs. Sensory structures in the walls of certain vessels that monitor blood pressure and blood chemistry. They send information to the brainstem that serves to regulate heart rate, vasomotion, and respiration. We have the carotid sinuses, the carotid bodies, and then the aortic bodies. The carotid sinuses are baroreceptors, pressure sensors in the walls of the internal carotid artery, and they monitor blood pressure. The carotid bodies are chemoreceptors. They monitor blood chemistry. They are oval bodies near branch of common carotids. They adjust respiration rates to stabilize pH, carbon dioxide, and oxygen contents. The aortic bodies are also chemoreceptors, and there are 3 of them. And they are found in the aortic arch, and they have the same function as the carotid bodies. The capillaries is where the exchange of nutrients and gases occur, as well as waste and hormones. And the business end of the cardiovascular system is known as the capillaries. And there are no capillaries in ligaments, in tendons, in the epithelial tissue, the cornea, and the eye lens. There are no capillaries. But we have 3 major types of capillaries. And they are so because of the differences that they have in their structure and then in their function. 1, we have continuous capillaries. Continuous capillaries occur in most tissues. The epithelial cells have tight junctions. That means they don't allow anything to go past that junction, forming a continuous capillary tube with intercellular clefts. And the intercellular clefts allow little solutes like glucose to pass through them. But they are also wrapped with pericytes around them, and they contain some contractile proteins such as muscle, and they contract and regulate blood flow. So here is a picture of the continuous capillary. Okay, you have these pericytes. The pericytes, they guard the walls. And then we have the pinocytes. We have the tight junction. Okay, at the bottom of the diagram, you can locate the tight junction. That is the tight junction. They don't allow materials to pass through. But the small intercellular clefts, like that one, the small intercellular clefts below the basal lamina is where tiny solutes can pass through into the capillaries. Now, the second one, we are looking at the fenestrated capillaries. The fenestrations are pores or small holes in the capillaries, and we find them mostly in the kidneys and in the small intestines. Organs that require rapid absorption or filtration have them. Endothelial cells riddled with holes called filtration pores or fenestrations, and they are spanned by very thin glycoprotein layer. They allow passages of small molecules. So this is an example of the fenestration in the capillary. These are the fenestrations, okay? The pores that you see, they are the fenestrations. And you can also see it in the diagram, the color diagram. You can see it there too. The fenestrations are showing there. And you find this in the kidney capillaries. You also find it, especially in the glomerular, and then you find it in the small intestines as well. The last one is the sinusoid or discontinuous capillaries. They are found in the liver, in the spleen, and then in the bone marrow. They have irregular blood-filled spaces with large pores or fenestrations, and they allow proteins, albumin, clotting factors, and new blood cells to enter the circulation. Example of sinusoid capillaries are here. Okay, you can see a cleft big enough for the red blood cell to pass through. All right, and this is found in the liver. In the liver. Okay. Capillaries are organized into networks called capillary beds. Usually they are supplied by a single meta-arteriole. Meta is beyond the artery. So a thoroughfare channel where the meta-arteriole that continues through the capillary bed to the venue. And the precapillary sphincter controls which beds are well perfused. When sphincters open, capillaries perfused with blood and exchange substances with tissue fluid. When sphincters close, blood bypasses the capillaries and it flows through the thoroughfare channel to the venue. 3/4 of the body's capillaries are shut down at any given time. This is what it means. For instance, when you are exercising, your muscles will have a lot of their blood capillaries opened instead of on the digestive system or on the nervous system or on the kidney system, because that is where most of the work is being done. So wherever work is being done, that is where you find most of the capillaries filled with blood. So as we are talking, you are listening, you are learning something. So your brain has a lot of capillaries opened, and the brain is being supplied with a lot of blood containing food so that they help the blood, the brain to work. All right? When you are eating and you are trying to study at the same time, it's very difficult because your brain and your digestive system will not be able to cope at the same rate. So please, when you are studying, you study. When you are eating, you eat. When you are exercising, you exercise. And so on and so forth. Okay? So this is the capillary bed we are talking about. The capillary bed we are talking about. So here, this is the arteriole and the meta-arteriole breaking into capillaries. And the capillaries have lots of sphincters. So here, we have the sphincters blocking or not allowing blood to go beyond the sphincters. So that if it is the sphincter that is well perfused in the skeletal system whilst you are exercising, fantastic. But exercising and eating at the same time is not healthy for anybody. Right. So here, the capillary bed is closed. You can see from here that the sphincters are closed here so that blood can flow only in one meta-artery. Arteriole. It can only flow in one meta-arteriole. Right. So, the veins have a greater capacity for blood containment than the arteries. That's because the vein is carrying blood under low pressure, but the artery has blood under high pressure. So the blood runs through the artery in no time at all. The veins, however, take time to send the blood back to the heart. That is why the vein is a #1 reservoir of blood. So anytime you want blood, you can get it from the vein, not the artery. Not the artery. Right. The thinner walls of the veins are flaccid. They are less muscular and they have less elastic tissue. When there is no blood in the veins, they collapse. And they have steady blood flow. They merge to form larger veins and they are subjected to relatively low blood pressure because of the fact that the blood has to go through the arteries, slowing them down considerably. The veins have post-capillary venules. That is the smaller veins. After the capillaries, you have the smaller veins called the venules, and even more porous than the capillary. So also exchange fluid with the surrounding tissues. The medium veins have valves in them, and the skeletal muscles pump or propel venous blood back towards the heart. And venous sinuses have veins with especially thin walls, large lumens, and no smooth muscle. The varicose veins are blood pools in the lower leg in people who stand for long hours, stretching the veins, and cusps of the valves pull apart in enlarged superficial veins, further weakening the veins. And the blood backflows and further distends the vessels. Their walls grow weak and develop into varicose vein. It can be hereditary, it can be developed. So obesity and pregnancy also contribute to varicose veins. Hemorrhoids are varicose veins in the anal cavity. Now, blood pressure. Blood pressure is a force that blood exerts against the vessel wall, and it is measured at the brachial artery of the arm using a sphygmomanometer. Two pressures are recorded, systolic and diastolic. The systolic is the peak arterial blood pressure during ventricular contraction, and the diastolic is the minimal arterial blood pressure taken during ventricular relaxation or the diastole between heartbeats. And normal value for the young adult, you have 120/75 millimeters of mercury, or sometimes we call it 120/80. Now, abnormalities of blood pressure, we have hypertension. We've talked about it before. Hypertension is high blood pressure. Chronic is resting blood pressure of 140/90, and the consequences can weaken small arteries and cause them to become ballooned or cause aneurysm. Hypotension is chronic low resting blood pressure, and that is caused by blood loss, dehydration, and anemia. Blood pressure rises with age. Blood pressure rises with age. So as we age, you have to be careful with our blood pressure and what we eat. Okay. So blood flow in response to the needs. That's what we were trying to describe earlier on. For somebody who is resting, that man is resting in his sofa, there will be very little blood flow to the legs. So it's important that the legs are raised up to almost the height of the knee. But somebody who is exercising, there is reduced blood flow to the intestines, but more blood flow are sent to the legs. All right? Blood flow in response to the needs. The arterioles shift blood flow with changing priorities. So if you are resting, more blood flow is sent to your intestines or the mesenteric arteries. And if you're exercising, more blood is sent to your legs rather than the mesentery or the digestive system. Okay, the capillary is where we have exchange, and there are fenestrations in them. They have process like diffusion, active transport, and so on occurring, or facilitated diffusion occurring at the capillary around the intestines, because that is where food nutrients are absorbed into the body. Okay, so that is the capillary. We've talked about them a lot. Now, the next thing we are going to look at is edema, or some people call it edema. Edema is the accumulation of excess fluid in a tissue, and it occurs when fluid filters into a tissue faster than it is absorbed. 3 ways that this can happen: increased capillary filtration, reduced capillary absorption, obstructed lymphatic drainage. Now, increased capillary filtration, we are looking at kidney failure, histamine release, old age, poor venous return. Reduced capillary absorption, we are looking at hypoproteinemia, liver disease, dietary protein deficiency, and obstructed lymphatic drainage. We are looking at surgical removal of lymph nodes. And the consequences of edema, you are looking at a scenario where there is too much water around, let's say, a plant in a swampy area. Certain plants cannot dwell in a swampy area. They drown, the roots begin to die. Okay? So in the same thing, if there is too much fluid around the cells, then the cells begin to drown and the tissues undergo necrosis. Oxygen delivery and waste removal is impaired or prevented, and pulmonary edema that is where there is collection of fluid around the lungs, and it can lead to suffocation. We can also have a condition known as cerebral edema, where there is fluid around the brain, and it will lead to headaches, nausea, seizures, and coma if care is not taken. Severe edema will lead to circulatory shock. Excess fluid in tissue spaces cause low blood volume and low blood pressure. Now, in order for blood to return through the vein, there must be pressure gradient. Pressure gradient. That is, blood pressure is the most important force in the venous return, and gravity drains blood from the head and the neck. But when it comes to the lower limbs, there is skeleton that helps the blood to be pumped into the inferior vena cava and then into the heart. The thoracic pump is experienced when there is inhalation. The thoracic cavity expands and thoracic pressure decreases, abdominal pressure increases, forcing blood upwards. Then there's also cardiac suction. Cardiac suction is when there is expanding of atrial space. Atrial space. So I want us to look at the diagram where blood is returned with the help of muscles. So this is the muscles that are contracted. You see, it forces the blood vessel to pump blood forward. But the muscle that is relaxed, there is no such thing happening. Okay, so blood is retained in the vein. You can also see the valves that is closed as a result of weight falling on them. Okay, so when we exercise, we have more blood getting back to the heart. Exercise is something that helps blood to get back to the heart. But when we are not exercising, blood takes a slow journey back to the heart. So let us remember to exercise on regular basis. Exercise on regular basis. Right. Circulatory shock. Circulatory shock. The cardiac output that is not sufficient to meet the body's metabolic demand is known as circulatory shock. When there isn't enough blood getting to all parts of the body for metabolism to take place, then we are looking at circulatory shock. Under circulatory shock, we have cardiogenic shock. That is the inadequate pumping of the heart, leading to myocardial infarction or heart attack. Low venous return is where the cardiac output is low because too little blood is returning to the heart. There must be enough blood in the human being to cause blood to be circulated everywhere in the body, or most parts of the body, depending on the activity by the individual. So under that, we are looking at hypovolemic shock. Hypovolemic shock is the most common loss of blood volume, trauma, burns, dehydration. Hypo means below, and volemic means low, below the volume of blood that the body requires. Obstructed venous return shock, that is may be due to tumors or aneurysm that compresses a vein. And venous pulling shock is where you have long periods of standing, long periods of sitting, or widespread vasodilation. And neurogenic shock is loss of vasomotor tone. Vasodilation causes from emotional shock to brainstem injuries. Septic shock is bacterial toxins that trigger vasodilation and increase capillary permeability. Normally, the capillaries have tight junctions, especially the continuous capillaries. Anaphylactic shock is severe immune reaction to antigen, histamine release, generalized vasodilation, and increased capillary permeability. Transient ischemic attack is where you have brief episodes of cerebral ischemia caused by spasms of diseased cerebral arteries, dizziness, loss of vision, weakness, paralysis, headaches, or aphasia. Not aphasia, aphasia, because phasia means speech. So lack of speech is aphasia. Lasts from a moment to a few hours, and often early warning of impending stroke. Early warnings of impending stroke. Cerebral ischemia, where there is short or lack of oxygen supply to the brain. Lack of oxygen supply to the brain. Now, stroke or vascular accident, we've talked about it, is sudden death of brain tissue due to ischemia. Atherosclerosis, thrombosis, ruptured aneurysm are all causes of stroke. Effects of stroke range from unnoticeable to fatal. It can lead to blindness, paralysis, loss of sensation, loss of speech, and so on and so forth. We've talked about hypertension. A lot of people suffer from hypertension. We have hypertension affecting most people, and sometimes it is referred to as a silent killer. The major cause of heart failure, stroke, and kidney failure. It damages the heart by increasing afterload. The myocardium enlarges until it is overstretched and insufficient. Renal arterioles thicken in response to stress. A drop in renal blood pressure leads to salt retention or aldosterone and worsens the overall hypertension. So hypertensives are not supposed to eat a lot of salt in their diet. They have to watch their salt. They have to watch so many things in their diet so that they can prolong their life. Primary hypertension, you are looking at obesity, sedentary behavior, diet, and nicotine. So watch what you eat. Exercise regularly so that you have a balanced body mass. Secondary hypertension is where you have secondary diseases causing the hypertension. One of the diseases is kidney disease. It can lead to hypertension. And hyperthyroidism can also lead to hypertension. So that brings us to the end of the topic known as the great blood vessels. We've looked at the layers of the blood vessels. They have 3 layers. The outermost layer known as the tunica adventitia, the middle layer known as the tunica media, the innermost known as the tunica interna or tunica intima, and they are all separated by bands of connective tissues. And the capillaries, we've looked at the 3 types of capillaries: the sinusoidal capillaries, the fenestration capillaries, and the continuous capillaries. Thank you very much, and I'll see you for the next lesson.